Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to Wednesday Night Reviews reading of Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. Mr. Eames has been kind enough to allow us to publish this reading to YouTube for everyone to enjoy. He is a Canadian-born writer, originally from Wingham, Ontario. After attending college for theater arts, he changed direction in life to become, in his own words, an epic fantasy writer. Based on the book you're about to enjoy, I'd say he's making great strides towards that goal. My name is Konrad, and I'll be your narrator tonight on this wild adventure. Now, where were we? Chapter 3, One Song. Around midnight, a train of linked carriages hauled by sturdy Casker ponies clattered across Ardberg. It was free to ride, and spared drunks and those abroad late a long walk through often inclement weather. Tam flagged it out front of the cornerstone and chose a carriage she thought was empty. It wasn't. There was a city watchman passed out on the opposite bench. His helmet was overturned in his lap, and from the reek, Tam guessed it was filled with vomit. She pushed open the screens despite the cold, and once they were moving, it didn't smell so bad. The city was usually asleep at this time of night, but since the fights were the next day, the streets were lively still. Light and noise spilled out of every inn, music from every tavern. The brothels especially were busier than usual, and from behind their drawn curtains Tam heard yelps of pleasure and pain, often mingling. She saw a pair of black-robed priests cupping their hands to catch the falling snow. "The Winter Queen is coming!" cried one, a woman with her scalp shaved bare. That wasn't really news to anyone. According to her disciples, the Winter Queen, and the eternal winter said to accompany her return, was always coming. Tam figured those priests would be as surprised as everyone else if she actually decided to show up one day. At last they left the chaos behind. Tam sat alone with her thoughts, and with the snoring soldier, of whom she asked the question that had been on her mind since leaving the cornerstone earlier that evening. What the hell just happened? Tam approached the stage. She didn't even have an instrument. What sort of bard didn't own an instrument? You're not a bard, she reminded herself. You're a girl who is about to embarrass herself in front of 200 people, including Bloody Rose herself. A glance toward the balcony told her Rose was watching, still dragging on that half-pipe she'd lit earlier. Freecloud was beside her, Brune and Kira farther along the rail. Word that Fable was auditioning a new bard had swept the room like a brush fire. Now that the racket was starting to dwindle, Tam would be expected to take the stage and sing a song that might, or might not, change the course of her life forever. Tara and Tiamax were watching from behind the bar. The Arachnian offered her a three-handed wave and shouted, "You've got this!" over the din. Bran had shooed patrons from the table closest to the stage, while Edwick... Here. The old bard thrust his lute into her hands. "This is yours now." "No, I can't," she protested. The lute, which the bard referred to as Red 13, was the instrument on which Tam had learned to play. It was Ed's pride and joy. He'd had it for as long as Tam could remember, and had never played another instrument that she knew of. "Take her," he insisted. "Trust her. Do you know what song you'll play?" Tam knew 100 songs, but just now she couldn't recall even one of them. She shook her head. "Well, good luck." Edwick retreated to a seat beside Bran, and the entire tavern suddenly hushed all at once. Cradling her borrowed lute, Tam stepped onto the stage and crossed to the vacant stool. The boards squealed beneath her feet, impossibly loud. Her mind was racing, trying desperately to think of a song, any song, let alone one that would impress Rose. And then she had it, Castilla. It was rowdy and rousing, guaranteed to get the crowd on her side. It condensed the Battle of Castilla, during which Granule's mercenaries had overcome the Duke of Endlin and his Wildheart horde, into 7 verses and an instrumental solo Tam hoped to hell she was capable of pulling off. Better still, it painted Rose's father, Golden Gabe, as the greatest hero in the 5 courts, without even mentioning that he'd crossed the entire breadth of the Heart Wild to rescue his daughter from almost certain death, or that Gabe and his bandmates, in the process of getting there, had cured the rot, killed a dragon, and destroyed half of 5 Court. The last verse was dedicated to Rose herself, who'd led those besieged inside the city to victory at last. Castilla was perfect. She took a breath, waited for the silence to deepen, the way Edwick had taught her to, and then, "Pfft, what the fuck is this?" Brannigan was standing, having sipped his whiskey before spewing it onto his lap. "What in the cold heart of hell did you put in here, Max? Lamp oil? Piss? Gods, is this Hatcher piss?" He sniffed it and went so far as to taste it again. "It's bloody awful!" Edwick dragged him down onto his seat and hissed at him to shut up. "Sorry," he told the room. "Sorry, Tam. Go on, love." Tam took another breath, waited, again, for the utter silence to descend, and then plucked the opening chords to Castilla. A roar of approval went up from the Commons. A great big smile broke across Brannigan's face, and Edwick nodded approvingly. When Tam looked to the balcony, though, Rose seemed uninterested. She stamped her half-pipe out on the rail and said something under her breath to Freecloud. The shaman, Brune, pulled his long hair aside. He locked eyes with Tam and shook his head so slightly it was almost imperceptible. She stopped. The song's opening notes were left shivering in the air. A confused murmur rose and left behind a bewildered hush. "Can I start over?" she called up to Rose. The mercenary's eyes narrowed. "If you'd like." Tam closed her eyes, aware that her hands were trembling, that her foot was tapping nervously at the boards beneath her. She could hear her heart pounding, feel her blood rushing, see her dream of leaving Ardberg and Fable's company lingering by the door, already clenching its cloak against the cold outside. Tam thought of her father, of how furious he'd be if he could see her now. She thought of her mother, of how proud she'd be if she could see her now. Before she knew it, her fingers had picked out a melody, slow and soft and sad. It was one of her mother's songs, Tam's favorite. Her father's too, once upon a time. She was forbidden to play it, of course. She'd tried singing it to herself once, shortly after her mother's death, but grief had overwhelmed her, stifling her voice with sobs. Now it spilled out of her. The lute sang beneath her fingertips, and her words sailed through the rafters like floating lanterns set loose on a summer night. The song was called Together. It wasn't rowdy or rousing. It didn't garner a cheer as she played it, and her uncle's expression, Edwick's too, was mournful. As the song went on, though, the ghost of a smile haunted her lips. Together wasn't about a battle. There was no monster in it. No one was slain, and nothing at all was vanquished. It was instead a love letter from a bard to her band. It was about the little moments, the quiet words, the unspoken bond shared by men and women who eat and sleep and fight alongside one another day after day. It was about a bandmate's laughter, a bunkmate's snoring. Lily Hashford had dedicated a whole verse to describing her husband's sidelong smile, and another decreeing the smell of Brand's socks when he pulled off his boots. "They're my lucky socks," she heard her uncle confess to the old bard beside him. "I'm still wearing them." Another unique aspect of Together was that the music ended before the words, so that Tam sang the last refrain with her lute in her lap. Her hands were motionless, her foot was still, her aching heart beat a slow and steady cadence inside her. The song ended, and you could hear the candles flicker in the silence that followed. As 200 heads turned to the balcony above. Brune and Kira were watching Rose. Freecloud was looking down at Tam. He was grinning, Tam saw, because he already knew. "Welcome to Fable," said Rose, and the crowd went wild. Tam tugged the bell cord. When the carriage came to a stop, she hopped out and called her thanks to the driver. Home was a short walk away, but she took her time. She bowed her head against the blowing snow and stepped carefully over cobbles slick with ice. Edwick's red 13 was cradled in her arms, like a suckling babe. The Cornerstone's bard had insisted she keep it, and when Tam refused, because she couldn't deprive him of his most cherished possession, he scurried into the back and returned with a near-identical instrument he'd dubbed Red 14. So that was that. Tam had never owned an instrument of her own before. As a girl, she'd assumed she would one day inherit her mother's lute, Hirith. But when her mother died, Hirith had disappeared as well. Likely, her father had destroyed it, or else sold it off so the sight of it wouldn't haunt him. Uncle Bran had warned her against going home at all. "Stay here tonight," he begged, "or sleep in the Argosy. I'll go by your place in the morning and sort things out with Tuck. I'll say it was me who asked Fable to take you on." "It was you." The old rogue considered that a moment. "Gods of Grangeville, your old man's gonna kill me. My point is, if there's hell to pay, let me pay it." There would be hell to pay. Tam was sure of it. But no matter how estranged she and Tuck had become these last few years, she couldn't leave without saying goodbye. Bran regarded her sadly. "You've got a fire in you, Tam. I can see it in your eyes. I can feel it rolling off you. Hot as a hearth. I know Tuck, and if you take that fire home, he'll smother it. He'll snuff it out and stamp it to ash." When Tam only shrugged, her uncle shook his head. "I'll drink to your valor, then," he said, and quaffed what remained of the horrid Turnstone whiskey. "You know, this stuff ain't so bad once you're used to it." Tam paused outside the door of her home, steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. She heard a meow from inside, Threnody heralding her arrival. When she finally worked up the courage to enter, the cat threw herself against Tam's boot and purred contentedly. Her father was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of what she hoped was just beer. He was staring at nothing and toying absently with a strip of yellow ribbon. "What did I tell you about putting bows on the cat?" he asked. Tam shook off her cloak and hung it by the door, then knelt to scratch Threnody behind the ears. She was rewarded with another throaty purr. Thren was a long-haired palapty, white as fresh snowfall. Tam's mother had brought her home from a town down south. "But she looks so cute with it on there." "She looks ridiculous. Don't—" He trailed off as she stood, his glare fastened to the instrument in Tam's arms. "What's that for?" he asked. "Playing music," Tam answered. "Great start," she berated herself. "Way to butter 'em up." "Why do you have it?" he clarified. "Ed gave it to me." Tuck's perpetual frown deepened. "Well, you've no need of it. You'll return it tomorrow." "I won't." "You will." "I can't." "Can't?" Her father looked suspicious. "Why can't?" Outside, the wind picked up. It pummeled the walls and clawed at the windows with ice-cold fingers. Threnody finished circling Tam's foot and trotted over to her water bowl, oblivious to the tension in the room. Or maybe she just didn't care. Cats could be assholes sometimes, and Thren was no exception. "Fable's in town," she said. "They were at the Cornerstone tonight. Uncle Bran." She saw her father's knuckles go white, no doubt wishing the mug in his hand was Brannigan's throat. "They mentioned they were looking for a bard, and Bran told them I could play." "Can you now?" Her father's tone was breezy, conversational. That's when she knew he was really angry. "Self-taught, are you? A born natural? You haven't picked up a lute since you were little." "Ed's been teaching me after work," she admitted. Boy, she was throwing everyone under the Argosy's wheels tonight, wasn't she? She might as well confess that Tara had been giving her archery lessons twice a week, and that TMX poured her a beer at the end of every shift. That way, her father could plot the murder of everyone in the Cornerstone. "Is that so?" Tucked down what remained in his mug and stood. "Then when you return his loot tomorrow, you can let Ed know you're quitting. They need extra hands at the mill. You can start next week." "I already quit," she told him, irritated by the dismissiveness in his tone. "I'm Fable's bard now." "No, you're not." "Yes, I am." "Tam." His voice grew stern. "Dad?" His mug exploded against the far wall. Threnody bolted from the room as shards rained to the floor. She said nothing, only waited for his rage to subside. He slumped back into his chair. "I'm sorry, Tam. I can't let you go. I can't risk losing you." "So what?" she asked. "I'm supposed to stay in Ardburg my whole life? Work at the mill for a few lousy countermarks a week? Find some nice, boring girl to settle down with?" "There's nothing—" "Wait, girl?" "Maiden's mercy, Dad, are we really doing this right now?" "That doesn't matter," Tuck said. "Listen, this is our fault. I know that. Your mother and I told you too many stories. We made being a merc sound more glamorous than it is. It's a hard life, you know. Long roads, lonely nights, you're wet half the time, cold all the time, and then you fight some horrible thing in some awful place, and you're scared shitless it'll kill you before you kill it. It's not like the songs, Tam. Mercenaries aren't heroes. They're killers. Tam moved to join him at the table. She set the loot down and took her seat. The chair between them, her mother's chair, remained empty as a chasm. Things are different now, she said, laying her hand over his. We'll be touring arenas mostly. I'll probably never see the inside of a monster's lair or set foot in the Heartwild. Her father shook his head, unconvinced. There's a horde north of Cragmore, the remnants of those who survived Castilla. Rose'll want her crack at it, sure as hell is cold. Ain't nobody loves glory like that girl, except maybe her father. Gods, that guy was a piece of work. Rose wants nothing to do with it. That caught him by surprise. Really? Tam shrugged. Fable's going to finish the last leg of their tour. They've got fights in every town between here and Highpool, and a contract in Diremark after that. Diremark? What's the contract? I don't know, but whatever it is, it'll be 1,000 miles away from the Brummel Horde. She had no idea whether that was true or not. She wasn't even sure where Diremark was. Her father seemed halfway convinced, however, so she didn't bother mentioning Rose's warning that whatever they were going up against might be as dangerous as the horde itself. For a while, her father's gaze remained fixed on the floor, roving the scatter of clay shards as though trying to decide whether or not he could piece them together again. As the silence stretched, Tam dared to hope she'd found the chink in the impenetrable armor of Tam Hashford's embittered criticism. No, he finally said, you're not going. But I don't care, he said ladenly. Whatever you're going to say, whatever reason you think will justify leaving, none of them matter. Not to me. You don't get a say in this, Tam. I'm sorry. I should have listened to Bran, she thought. I should have left without saying goodbye. The fire inside her was waning, and Tam feared it would go out forever if she didn't act now. She stood and set out for the door. Chips of clay crunched beneath her boots. Tam, I'll stay at the Cornerstone tonight. She pulled her cloak off its peg. Tam, sit down. We're heading for the arena first thing in the morning, she said, doing her best to keep the tremor from her voice. And we start east the morning after that. I doubt I'll see you before then, so I guess this is... She turned and froze. Her father was standing, staring down at the object in his hands, the loot she'd left behind on the table. It looked small, so impossibly fragile, as though her dream of joining the band and following in her mother's footsteps, of escaping this city, this house, this prison of sorrow and its grief-stricken jailer, were but a toy in the grasp of a malevolent child. Dad. She looked up. Their eyes met. In hers a plea, in his a black rage rising. Something, another apology perhaps, died on his lips. And then her father took her lute by its neck and smashed her dreams to splinters.